matter the year, it's still a Blériot 11. Doesn't fly better. It's not like wine, doesn't age well. And so it's dangerous. It's bloody dangerous.
Louis Blériot dared all and changed the course of history. But what of his grandson as he flies off on a personal mission to recreate one of aviation's most historic flights?
Major funding for NOVA is provided by the Park Foundation, dedicated to education and quality television.
Science. It's given us the framework to help make wireless communications clear. Sprint is proud to support NOVA.
We see one small step on Mars. Microsoft is proud to sponsor NOVA for celebrating the potential in us all.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Louis Blériot's home is in Brittany, about 5 hours due west of Paris. Here he pursues his passion for collecting memorabilia related to his grandfather. His prized possession is an original Blériot 11 aircraft. The 11 was the culmination of years of trial and error by Louis's grandfather. It became the Model T of the aviation industry, the first airplane to be mass-produced.
Yeah.
While many museums would welcome this Blériot into their collection, it is in this featherweight antique that Louis hopes to fly the Channel.
I mean, an airplane is made for flying, even if it's a very old airplane and a historic airplane. Well, that's what I think, anyway.
This won't be the first attempt to cross the Channel in Louis's airplane.
An attempt to reenact.
In 1989, he gave a young British woman the chance. Her light weight was thought to be an advantage.
The vintage monoplane was forced to ditch in the sea just 2 miles from home.
The pilot was safe, but the airplane badly damaged.
The problem was not the ditching, the problem was the blast of the helicopter blades overturned the Blériot, and so it smashed it completely, damaged the wings. It was awful, I was aghast.
The grandson of Louis Blériot, owner of the plane disconsolate.
You want to check that out? See how far it is? Going away.
It took 3 years to restore the Blériot.
Going away.
Now Louis trains to fly the airplane himself.
All right, sit down.
He is as determined to succeed as his grandfather was.
Can you put on your
At the dawn
glasses?
of aviation, 100 years ago.
Yep, we want.
Louis Blériot was born into an era passionate for flight. It is the age of the balloon, which has flourished in France
on
since its
some sort
invention
of chair,
here in
Daddy,
the late
turn the light on.
1700s.
Okay, ready. Come on.
Paris in the early century was one of the centers of the universe, if I may say. And it's a kind of a Parisian tradition to have the people from the city being involved in all these aerial adventures. It was part of the city life.
At the turn of the century, Alberto Santos Dumont dominates the Parisian aeronautical scene. Almost everyone has seen him drift by on the wind, or sometimes drop down for an impromptu lunch.
I think there was something in the water or the air of Paris at the turn of the century that just produced these wonderful characters, like Santos Dumont, for example, who had come to France from Brazil as a young man to study engineering and just threw it all away to putter around over the skyline of Paris.
Ballooning allows a liberation from the earth that is intoxicating and more than a little out of control.
I'm moving.
Even with a motorized propeller
No bill on my
to set the
seat.
wind, elusive air currents play a major role in where one ends up.
So I'll have to look at my records. I'm going to go left.
As an engineering student, Louis Blériot develops an interest in new heavier-than-air flying machines that would go where you wanted and get there fast. But no one has yet built a successful.
You are authorized on my account.
Not Clement Adair in France with his unfolding bat-like avion, nor Hiram Stevens Maxim with his 8,000-pound machine in England. And not Samuel Langley and his aerodrome in America. Louis Blériot decides to keep his enthusiasm for flying machines to himself, for fear of being taken for a fool. The automobile is an altogether different matter.
Ooh, that sounds good.
The French have, in short order, refined the essentially German invention and adopted it as their own. As nighttime excursions become possible, there is need for a bright automobile headlamp. Blériot designs an acetylene-fueled light and prospects. He meets and marries Alicia Verder. As their family grows, Blériot seems to be settling into the life of a prosperous small industrialist. But as soon as his business provides a substantial income, Louis Blériot responds once again to the siren call of aviation. Blériot's grandson will learn to fly the Blériot 11 at La Ferté-Alais, an airfield and home for nearly 100 period airplanes, all ready to fly. The collection was started in the 1950s, when the father of the current owner, Jean Celis, purchased a Blériot 11 and restored the aircraft so he could fly it. He kept on collecting.
Louis Blériot est un garçon qui...
Louis Blériot came to me a long time ago, and I understood that he really wanted to cross the channel. He's become a good friend of mine. I couldn't let him throw himself into this project without having the right training. These planes are hard to pilot. Louis trains very seriously. I think of him as our protégé. We've been helping him to succeed in fulfilling his dream.
Are you sure you did with the other?
In 1900, the elder Blériot's dream of flight takes inspiration from those best of all flyers, the birds. His first designs are for ornithopters, flapping contraptions with mechanical wings. The ornithopter has been a starting point for many would-be flyers, but the elaborate, heavy machinery required tends to keep them earthbound. The leading aviation journal, L'Aérophile, could report little progress during the first years of the century. Then, in 1903, rumors start to circulate about the experiments of two bicycle makers in America, Wilbur and Orville Wright.
Octave Chanute, the French-born American engineer, came to Paris and gave a lecture in which he talked about what he had done and what other Americans, including the Wright brothers, had done.
Chanute shows how far the Wright brothers have progressed toward achieving a practical airplane. Their methodical approach contrasts with the hit-and-miss efforts of other early pioneers. They've even built one of the first wind tunnels to determine what shape gives a wing the most efficiency. Wind tunnel data confirms that a gently curved wing will supply maximum lift. The air moves faster over the top of such a curve, reducing air pressure, causing the wing to rise. But if the curve becomes too steep, the airflow breaks up and the wing stalls.
One of the things that set the Wrights apart was this clarity that they brought to analyzing the problem of the flying machine. They, almost uniquely, recognized that this was really about solving the control problem. How are you going to control this thing once you get it into the air?
The Wrights designed gliders to investigate control in the air. They use a double-winged biplane design, fitted with control surfaces, sections that can be moved to change the direction of flight. Their third glider carries an elevator in front to control pitch up and down. The Wrights design a mechanism for twisting the wings to bank and roll the aircraft. They call it wing warping. Behind the wings, they place a rudder to control side-to-side movement, or yaw. The rudder, along with wing warping, enables the Wrights to maintain balance as well as turn in the air. It's a crucial breakthrough, intuitively understood by bicycle makers.
If you think about a bicycle, when you want to go around a sharp corner in a bicycle, you actually lean it over to go around that corner. If you just tried to turn the wheel without leaning the bicycle over, it'd actually fall. So you needed that roll in order to cause the airplane to start to make its turn.
Only sketchy accounts of the Wrights' progress make it to Paris, but they touch a nerve.
The French were just absolutely stunned because it was clear that these two guys, bicycle makers from Dayton, Ohio, were in fact well ahead of anything that the French had dreamed of.
The Wrights have solved basic problems of both lift and control in the air, but they have yet to fly a motorized machine. The race to invent the airplane is on.
A little band of enthusiasts in the Aero Club de France set out to overtake the Wright brothers and win for France the honor of the invention of the airplane. Louis Blériot himself, in a French newspaper, was described as one of the militant aviators. They really were just determined to do it.
Numbered among the militants are Gabriel and Charles Voisin, both avid bicyclists. When Gabriel is approached to build a glider based on the Wrights' design, he can't resist. One June day in 1905, Louis Blériot joins a small crowd to watch Voisin test his new model. Voisin borrows the Wrights' biplane design and forward elevator. Blériot is so impressed that he orders a glider from Voisin on the spot. But he wants modifications. The new glider carries curved wings, which Blériot believes will provide greater lift. Never one to take the back seat, he names his glider the Blériot 2. Blériot 1 is assigned to his ornithopters. Voisin tests the glider. This time, he nearly drowns trying to free himself from the wreckage. Blériot is not in the least discouraged. In fact, he invites Voisin to join him in a partnership. Despite their limited success, they show no lack of confidence. Blériot goes to work on a new design, reveling in the possibilities. My dear Voisin, he says, I am living here through the happiest moments of my life. But by now, the success of the Wrights can no longer be ignored. In fact, they claim to have been secretly flying a powered machine since December of 1903. Pirated sketches have been published, but without better proof. Many in France remain skeptical.
Blériot was looking for the good formula, so any idea was good. At this time it was all by trial and error. You have no theory, no scientific arguments that could put people together.
Kites are an important way of testing ideas. Blériot informs Voisin that he is determined that a stable flying machine can only be formed with a circular wing, front and back. Voisin is appalled that Blériot would forego the already successful rectangular wing design.
Blériot was very obstinate, Voisin also. But Blériot, well, he had the money.
In the end, Voisin wins a concession. The wings become ovals. The Blériot 3 is not a glider, but a full-fledged flying machine with twin propellers powered by 2 gasoline engines. When a workman sets out to test it, in full view of a curious, often mocking crowd, the airplane races wildly about, but refuses to fly. A revised version, the Blériot 4, splices Voisin's rectangular wings onto Blériot's oval tail. The mutation, unable to fly, is seriously damaged as it crosses a ditch. The two partners, their hopes shattered, dissolve their collaboration. On the very same day, balloonist Santos Dumont triumphs with his own flying machine. With the dejected Blériot and Voisin in attendance, Santos Dumont, standing upright as if in a balloon, nurses his 14 beasts through a series of barely controlled hops, the best of which, 722 feet, wins an Aero Club prize. The achievement marks a turning point for Blériot. Having seen a man in the air, he is determined to get there himself and to pilot his own designs.
Louis, tu te mets et tu reviens un peu?
Oui. The first airplanes were unlike anything that had come before, but for the most part, they employed components and methods already developed for other uses. The technique of trussing the wooden frame with diagonal runs of piano wire is the same way many bridges were built.
The pioneer.
Lightweight tension wheels could be found on bicycles and baby buggies of the day. The 25 horsepower engine was first built for motorcycles.
Huh?
The propeller was new, but had roots in the design of marine propellers in use for the better part of the century.
Ouais.
Blériot does not arrive at his classic design easily. His approach is improvisational and disorderly, almost the opposite of the Wrights. But he has money enough to hire the best mechanics and craftsmen. He puts them to work on a revolutionary new design. The Blériot 5 will be a monoplane, one of the first, with a single set of wings, like a bird. Following the Wrights' practice, the engine pushes the airplane from behind. The tail is in front, with both elevator and rudder. But this bird barely hops and suffers a series of discouraging crashes.
The problem with putting the tail or the control surfaces ahead of the main wing is that the airplane tends to be unstable. It tends to want to reverse itself. You can think of it like a tricycle. If you try and push a tricycle backwards, it tends to want to flip around.
I think he had too much imagination. If you look at the designs of his aircraft, they are all very different, very, very different. And to the contrary of many, many other designers who just improved the same idea, and sometimes they were wrong and they kept wrong, he was always trying something different.
Blériot thinks that the 5 doesn't have enough wing area for lift. So for the new Model 6, he borrows an idea from one of his mechanics and places wings on the front and back. He also moves the engine forward and puts the rudder behind. There is no elevator. To control pitch in this aircraft, Blériot puts the seat on wheels so that by rolling back or forward, the airplane will be weighted to tilt up or down. The 6 is brought out for tests in July of 1906. At last, Blériot gets in the air. The distance is less than a football field, but for the first time, Blériot has actually flown. Grandson Louis starts his flight training in a Piper Cub, a monoplane from the 1940s that shares some of the characteristics of the Blériot 11. Dual controls allow his instructor to correct any wrong moves.
Blériot's use of the monoplane was really interesting. He wasn't the only one of the pioneers who chose the monoplane, but certainly biplane builders were much more common. And the reason for that is clear enough. A biplane structure is very strong, very difficult to break or damage, just a lot of strength. Monoplanes, on the other hand, in this period, before the First World War, had sort of fundamentally weak wing structures. The reason that people like Blériot, the others who built and flew monoplanes did it, was because of speed, I think, as much as anything else. There's less resistance with a monoplane, so, you just have an airplane that's going faster.
Louis must learn to land on the front 2 wheels of the Piper Cub, because the Blériot only has 2 wheels.
Merde. Merde. Ça retire l'air alors. Ah ça c'est ridicule, c'est ridicule. Absolument ridicule. Très mauvais. Ah, encore, on arrondit, encore. Parfait. Ah, laissez-le faire. Voilà, très bien.
(1908) will be remembered as the year of aviation miracles in France. Improving on his basic design, Blériot's old partner Gabriel Voisin has moved rapidly ahead. In the first months of 1908, Voisin's machines are traveling as far as a mile. By spring, they're staying aloft for over 5 minutes. The leading aeronauts can all be found at Issy-les-Moulineaux, an airfield in Paris. Here they are treated like celebrities.
The excitement was palpable. You could go out to Issy and see them in the air day after day, or trying to get into the air. I mean, it really was extraordinary once people began to fly. It was like realizing something that had been a symbol of human aspiration.
But staying in the air is still a problem.
When Europeans and others sort of set out in pursuit of the rights, they paid far less attention to the control issues. They sort of muscled their way into the air with engines and wings and so on and so forth, and sort of did the best they could with the control that they'd come up with. When they're making a turn, they sort of have to skid around the turn with the rudder because they have no real way to balance those wings. Those airplanes are really almost not in control.
Louis Blériot has control problems of his own. The Blériot 6 that first got Louis off the ground survives only a few months. The 7 doesn't last much longer. But flying low and slow, the outcome is often not fatal. Blériot reassures the public. A man who keeps his head in an aeroplane accident is not likely to come to much harm, he says. I always throw myself upon one of the wings of my machine when there is a mishap, and although this breaks the wing, it causes me to alight safely.
He crashed and crashed. He was called the Prince de la Guigne because he had crashed so much.
But the Prince of Bad Luck now believes that his hard-won lessons will pay off, that controlled, continuous flight is within reach, if the competition doesn't pass him by. When the new Model 8 appears, Blériot has added new control surfaces to the ends of the now larger wings. These are ailerons, flaps designed to roll the plane from side to side, providing balance in a turn. Both the rudder and the elevator are now behind on the tail. The 8 flies and allows Blériot to gain crucial experience as a pilot. One day, ailerons will be standard, but without rigid wings to hold them in place, they are dangerously compromised. Something else is needed. In August of 1908, Wilbur Wright arrives in France to demonstrate his airplane, as part of the sales agreement with a French syndicate. Finally, the French aviation community has the chance to see firsthand what they've been hearing about for so long. The Wrights, preoccupied with business, have done little further development of their machine for several years, but they remain confident that they are well ahead of the competition. At the first demonstration, they face a small, curious audience of aviation enthusiasts who wonder, even hope, that all the secrecy has been a cover for some vital shortcut. The airplane requires a catapult to gain enough speed for takeoff. The Wright machine rises gracefully into the air and flies 2 neat circles with precision. The crowd is dazzled.
They saw him turning very tight circles, and it just took their breath away. Once they had seen that, they, as one of them said, nous sommes battus, we're beaten. You know, the Wrights have actually done this thing, and we have to learn from them now.
As the word spreads, thousands turn out for demonstrations that continue on into the winter. The French adopt Wilbur as a brilliant American rustic and consume an unending string of newspaper and magazine stories about him. But even with all this attention, Wilbur remains an enigma. The pilot Delagrange ruminates over who the man is behind the mask. Has he a heart? Has he loved? Has he suffered? Blériot introduces himself to Wilbur Wright and examines his airplane, especially the wing warping technique used to control the airplane's roll. Surprisingly open, Wilbur shows him how the Wright system bends the entire wing. Excited as a schoolboy, Blériot tells a friend, "I'm going to use a warped wing. To hell with the aileron." For Louis Blériot, it is the final piece of the puzzle. He uses it in his classic Model 11, which his grandson demonstrates to Tom Crouch, who has written widely about the Wright brothers and Louis Blériot.
This is a big wing. It must take a lot of effort to warp the whole thing.
Absolutely, yes. But it's a little easier in the air because part of the weight is off the cables. But you have to pull strongly on the stick to get the warping effect. And as regards the rest of the controls, it's exactly like a normal airplane. So you pull the stick to climb and you push to dive.
Blériot really pioneered this control approach, stick and rudder pedals.
Yes.
Just the same sort of thing pilots use today, really.
Yes, it's amazing to think that after 90 years, the way to control airplanes remains the same.
The first Paris Aeronautical Salon opens in December of 1908. A Wright biplane is the star of the show. But Louis Blériot presents his latest models, including, off in the corner, the diminutive 11, a direct descendant of the successful 8, but with wing warping. No one pays much attention, but with the 11, Blériot has built a forerunner of the modern airplane.
He used a tractor engine configuration, basically, which means the propeller is pulling the airplane. That has an advantage that at low speed, particularly in takeoff, you're blowing air over the tail surfaces, so they're effective at low speed. He had a monoplane wing, which has become standard today because it actually has less drag and is faster than a biplane. The control surfaces were on the back of the airplane, which is a more stable configuration than having the control surfaces out in front like the Wright brothers did. So the airplane tends to be self-righting if it's sort of going through the air sideways, you can sort of think of it like a weather vane that will tend to straighten out.
By June of 1909, the 11 can stay in the air for a half hour or more. At age 36, Louis Blériot is one of the few men in the world who can fly. But he's running out of money. The cost of his experiments has nearly exhausted his fortune. To raise cash, he sells the patent to his automobile headlight, then his summer home, and finally, his car. I had to keep going, he said, because like a gambler, I had to recover my losses. I had to fly. What he needs now is a spectacular flight to attract attention and buyers for his airplane. There is one possibility. The London Daily Mail is offering £1,000 to the first person to fly the 26 miles across the English Channel. After a year, no one has yet dared attempt it. As Louis refines his Model 11, he considers the crossing. Then, a popular sportsman named Hubert Latham announces his intention of trying for the prize. Colorful and wealthy, he spends much of his time traveling abroad. When the President of France asked him his profession, he replied, "Monsieur Président, I am a man of the world." Latham has only been flying a few months, and his plane, the Antoinette, is only recently completed. But he's already broken records for speed and endurance in the air. Latham arrives at the channel and begins preparations for the flight. Blériot intently follows Latham's progress in the press. Technical problems. Then rain and high wind keep Latham grounded until early on the morning of July 19th, 1909, when he takes off. Only 6 miles out, his engine stops. With the English shore not yet in sight, he glides into the water. The aircraft remains afloat. Discovering that his pockets are still dry, Latham proceeds to light a cigarette while waiting for rescue. The Antoinette is a wreck. Although Latham plans to try again, it will take at least a week for him to prepare. Latham's failure prompts Blériot into action. And now, after 9 years of waiting and preparation, Louis Blériot is ready to test fly his grandfather's airplane.
It's completely different from an airplane. You feel as if you were about to take off by yourself without it.
Blériot is ready to cross the English Channel, but he has a problem. During a recent flight, insulation came loose from an exhaust pipe, and his left foot received third-degree burns. But he discovers that he can still operate the rudder pedal even while hobbling on crutches. He immediately starts to search for a suitable takeoff site, finally settling on a low pasture that leads directly over the beach to the channel.
Votre grand-père a décollé de là-bas, des baraques.
The site must be as close to the channel as possible. The distance across will require the 11's engine to run at its outside limit for continuous operation.
Hello?
Excitement builds as high winds ground both aviators. Blériot, who is ready to go, waits for a break, while Latham's team, racing to assemble a new airplane, hope for continued bad weather. High winds from the southwest are accelerated by the geography of the channel. Since the little Blériot 11 cannot fly in winds greater than 4 knots, accurate weather prediction is invaluable. Reporters are gathering in force. The newspapers build suspense with the question, who will dare to fly first, the dashing Latham or the dogged Blériot? A French reporter, Charles Fontaine, sends Louis a picture postcard that shows a landing spot among the forbidding cliffs near Dover. He promises to be there, waving a French flag to guide Blériot in. Both the Blériot 11 and the Antoinette are now ready for flight. The next morning, the wind has died at last. But Blériot's mood on being awakened is not good. His foot hurts. He is nervous and refuses breakfast. Waking up that morning was terrible, he recalled. I would have been happy if they'd told me that the wind was blowing and no attempt was possible.
My grandfather's mother, she said to her friends, you know, Louis has gone completely mad. He wants to cross the channel in a kite.
By 4 a.m., the engine is thoroughly warmed up. Latham's camp, observed through a telescope, appears quiet. Just before takeoff, a small dog runs into the spinning propeller. Not the most propitious of omens.
Ouais, non, mais alors, vous avez roulé toute la nuit?
Ouais.
Au moins, ça tourne.
Ça valait le coup quand même.
Alors, on fait chauffer 7-8 minutes au moins.
Louis must take off into the wind, away from the channel, then make a turn towards Britain. Below me is the sea. The motion of the waves is not pleasant. I fly off. For 10 minutes, I'm lost. I let the aeroplane take its own course. This calm has a dangerous charm. I am very happy when I see a gray line which seems detached from the sea. It gets bigger each minute. Without a doubt, it is the English side. I'm almost safe. I fly towards the white cliffs, but the wind and the fog take me in. I must struggle with my hands and my eyes. 3 boats appear. They seem to be moving towards a port. Dover, without a doubt. I follow them. Suddenly, on one of the crevices, I see a man desperately waving a French tricolor flag. A feeling of absolute joy fills me. I move quickly towards the ground that he is signaling from. Now I must land, but the winds are strong, and as soon as I approach the ground, a whirlwind lifts me. The struggle doesn't last long, since I cannot stay in the air any longer. I cut the engine, and instantly my machine falls straight upon the land. The chassis doesn't take it very well, and the propeller is damaged. But, my goodness, too bad. Only one thing is on Blériot's mind. And Latham, where is he? He is still in France, a newspaper reporter tells him. He had overslept. The Blériot 11, like all early airplanes, is difficult to control at the best of times. But the verdict here is pilot error. In the heat of the moment, a failure to reverse the rudder pedal. The crossing turns Louis Blériot into an international hero.
The impact that it had on people was really quite extraordinary. The Channel is just recognized as England's barrier, England's wall. And now someone had flown over that Channel wall. And as everyone suddenly began saying in the newspapers, H.G. Wells most famously, England's no longer an island.
A new era of flight is underway. The editor of Le Figaro, Gaston Calment, writes, "When man can, by the action of his will alone, pass in a few hours beyond all horizons, beyond all the oceans, and above all the rivers, the conditions of human life will be profoundly changed." By the end of 1909, just 6 years after the Wrights' historic flight, the Blériot 11 holds most of the world's flying records for speed, altitude, and distance. During the years preceding World War I, the Blériot 11 becomes the most popular airplane in the world.
After Wilbur Wright had flown in France in 1908, and the French came to an understanding of his control system, they just zipped right ahead. And clearly, 1910, 11, 12, France is the most advanced nation in the world.
Non, ça n'a pas vraiment changé mon attitude. Disons que j'ai éprouvé
The wreck didn't change my attitude.
de déception, de frustration assez intense.
I have an intense feeling of frustration and disappointment.
Je me suis dit,
I said to myself, my grandfather succeeded in getting to the English coast, and you weren't even able to make it to the French.
atteindre la côte française. Alors, non, je vous dis, c'est important à titre personnel. Je ne vois pas ça en termes de ce que ça me rapporte.
I'm doing this for personal reasons, that's all. It's not for money or something like that. It's my goal, and I want to achieve it. And I will succeed one day. That's all.
D'y arriver, c'est tout.
Nova's website, hear more from Louis Blériot's grandson. Take a tour of the Model 11. Learn about the first woman to fly solo across the...
Vermont Public Television brings to you is unique, and that's personified by the program In Days Gone By. So you can make the call. We're going to get to 40 calls. I feel it in my bones, but you are the ones who make the difference. 1-800-639-8303.
31 calls, inching our way to 40. I think we can do it. Why do we have these campaigns anyway? Sometimes we have to stop and remind you, this is the best way we have of bringing in new members to the fold, new members to Vermont Public Television. And we are so excited when someone checks that brand new member box that makes us know that we can keep sustaining this service that is so important to all of us. And I want to thank someone else who sustains us, Smuggler's Notch, a grand underwriter of Vermont Public Television for many, many years. Sponsors one of our family events every year that's probably the biggest hit of them all. And smugs.com is their web address where you can find out more about all of the great things they have to offer. Skiing this time of year and wonderful recreation for the family all year long. So thank you for your support of tonight's programming. And thanks to Stephen and Judith Irving of Brookfield. Very glad to have you call in, and Elsie Spurl of Charlestown, New Hampshire. Very, very glad to hear from you tonight. Over in New York, wonderful town of Warrensburg in the Adirondacks. Annette Keenan is watching, and she called in. Thanks so much. Helen Marsh of Middlebury. Haven't heard from the Northeast Kingdom, but I'm sure that there are some being taken right now. We're getting a little bit closer. Forrest Thurston of Bradford. But I'd love to hear from somebody right from Caledonia County, or, you know, maybe one of Caro's neighbors right from Walden, Vermont. Let's get really local. Mary Savage of Swanton, another Franklin County stalwart, checks in. Lisa Cochran of Eden Mills, Vermont, getting closer to the kingdom. Maybe she's in the kingdom. Andy Bowright of Piermont, New Hampshire, thank you for your generosity. Please call 1-800-639-8303.
We're going to go to programming, new programming, very, very shortly. So I'm encouraging you once more. I mean, you've heard me say it. I really, what more can I say? You know the routine here. We've been here explaining to you that to get a videotape of your very own of In Days Gone By, you make a phone call to one of our wonderful what are they? They're not officers, they're operators. Yay! And they're from the Colchester Milton Rotary. These people have given their time to come and answer the phones, to talk to you. And they do that because they believe that public television is a community effort, as indeed it is. You know, when I go to interview people, they're donating their time. You know, we spend several hours with every person and getting, you know, their thoughts, their memories. They're very patient with my questions. Sometimes it takes me a while to figure out what I'm asking, but all of those are donating their times, and we are asking you for your donation, for your pledge. Scott, how many calls? 41 calls! You did it! Congratulations. That is terrific. Thank you so much for pledging Vermont Public Television.
Operators are standing by during the upcoming program to take your call. If you'd rather mail in your pledge, write to one of the following addresses on the screen. Or you can pledge via our easy-to-use and secure website at vpt.org. Thanks for watching and supporting Vermont Public Television.
It was good to be back in the wilderness again, where everything seems at peace. I was alone, just me and the animals. It was a great feeling, free once more to plan and do as I pleased. Beyond was all around me. My dream was a dream no longer. I suppose I was here because this was something I had to do. Not just dream about it, but do it. I suppose, too, I was here to test myself. Not that I had never done it before, but this time it was to be a more thorough and lasting examination. What was I capable of that I didn't know yet? Could I truly enjoy my own company for an entire year? And was I equal to everything this wild land could throw at me? I had seen its moods in late spring, summer, and early fall, but what about the winter? Would I love the isolation then? With its bone-stabbing cold, its ghostly silence? At age 51, I intended to find out. Another 100 yards, and I broke out of the brush to my pile of cabin logs I had cut last July. I sat down and leaned against them, and while I chewed on a chunk of smoked salmon, my eyes wandered over the peeled logs. That had been a big job last summer. Hard work, but I enjoyed it. It was cool at the timber, and there were mornings I could see my breath. I had harvested the logs from a stand of spruce less than 300 yards from where they were now piled. The logs were a great deal lighter now than they were then, and could be handled easily enough.
It was in the late spring of 1968 that Dick Prenneke decided to leave civilization behind to live in a pristine land yet unchanged by man, and to roam a wilderness through which few other humans have passed. While carving out a new life in this remote valley known as Twin Lakes, Dick would not only keep daily journals, but would film his Alaskan odyssey with the help of a tripod-mounted camera.
It was time to be moving on. I was anxious to get to Spike's cabin to see if it was the way I had left it last September. About 500 yards more through the spruce and the willow brush, and there it was. Its weather-grade moose antlers spreading just below the peak of the roof, a tin can on its stovepipe, and its windows were boarded up. The cabin had everything needed to set up housekeeping until my own cabin was completed. A good stove, 2 bunks, and a roof that didn't leak. Animals. I noon before I got back to the cabin. The rest of the day I devoted to my tools. I carved a mallet head out of a spruce chunk, augered a hole in it, and fitted a handle to it. This would be a useful pounding tool. and I hadn't had to pack it in either. The same with the handles I made for the wood augers, the wide-bladed chisel, and the files. Much easier to pack without the handles already fitted to them. Hope Creek has cut a big opening into the lake ice. Was it too early to catch a fish? I took the casting rod along to find out. It didn't take long. After several casts, it happened with the suddenness of a broken shoelace. I slid the 19-inch trout onto the stones. Fish with my beans tonight. It's May 25th. Breakup is not the spectacular sight it was last year. A big wind would have cleared the thin ice out yesterday. As I loaded tools on the packboard this morning, the rotted ice began to flow past in quiet exit. When you have miles and miles of lakefront and picture views to consider, it's difficult to select a building site. The more a man looks, the fussier he gets. I cleared the brush and hauled up beach gravel and spread it to a depth of several inches over an area roughly 20 feet by 20 feet. I felt I had made the best possible choice. It would be 11 feet by 15 feet. Its front door would face northwest, and the big window would look down to the lake. A pile of logs. Which ones to start with? To make a notch fit properly, you can't rush it. Make several saw cuts an inch or two apart, almost down to the pencil line, and whack out the chunks with an axe until the notch is roughly formed. Then comes the finish work, the careful custom fit. I have just the tool for the job. I must say white spruce works up nicely with an axe and draw knife. Enough for this evening. The job has begun. Tomorrow should see more working and less figuring. It's May 29th. Only a few chunks of ice floating in the lake this morning. By noon, there was no ice to be seen. It was good to see the lake in motion again, and it was even better to slip the canoe into the water and paddle to work for a change. I glided silently along over a different pathway. The cabin is growing. 28 logs are in place. 44 should do it, except for the gable ends and the roof logs. It really looks a mess to see the butts extending way beyond the corners, but I will trim them off later. You can't rush it. I don't want these logs looking as though a Boy Scout was turned loose on them with a dull hatchet. I was making good progress today when I heard a plane. It was Babe Aldrin. I watched the plane glide in for a perfect landing on the calm lake. Plenty of groceries this time, and among the supplies, rhubarb plants. They should be put in the ground right away. I found the frost about 4 or 5 inches down. I planted 15 hills of potatoes, tucked in some onion sets, and put in a few rows of peas, carrots, beets, and rutabagas. Not much of a garden by Iowa standards, but it would tell me what I wanted to find out. Finally, back to the cabin building. I'm a better builder than I am a farmer anyway. 38 logs are in place, and I'm almost ready for the eave logs. I cut the openings for the big window, the 2 smaller ones, and the opening for the door. Five logs were very special. These were the 20-footers, which along with the gable ends would be the backbone of my roof. 2 would be eave logs, 2 would be purlin logs, and the last and the straightest would be the ridge log. As it stands now, the cabin looks as though logs are sticking out all over it, like the quills of a riled porcupine. I've made good progress today. My cabin logs have magically changed form in the 10 days since I cut the first notch. It's June 7th, and I do believe the growing season is at hand. The buckbrush and willows are leafing out fast now. The rhubarb is growing, and I notice my onion sets are spiking up through the earth. Those window frames have been on my mind. Decided to do something about it. First, I built a sawhorse workbench, then selected straight grain sections of logs cut from the windows. With a thin-bladed wide chisel, I cut deep along the line on each side. Worked fine. I smoothed the split sides with the draw knife. The result was a real nice board, so I continued to fashion others, put them in place, and nailed them in. I finished the day cleaning the litter of wood chips. I mounted them in front of the door, Beaver Lodge style. Quite a pile for 11 days' work. Enough to impress that beaver. It's June 9th. Today would be a day away from the job of building. I'll look for the pole timber for the roof up lake. After beaching the canoe, I walked through the timber, crossing and recrossing the creek that had its beginnings in the far-off snows. Good piles were not as plentiful as I figured, and I worked steadily to get 48 out and back to the beach by noon. The mosquitoes were out in force. To peel the poles, I made a tripod of short sticks on which to rest one end and put the draw knife to work. I rafted them up and moved them down the lake to my beach. A good pile, but I doubt there will be enough. Today I would secure the roof poles over the gables. A cabin roof takes time. Soon I will be ready to saw the ends and fill the slots between the pole butts under the eaves.
Richard Prenneke had lived his life the way many of us had really wanted to, or have thought we'd wanted to from time to time, self-reliant and in the calm beauty of nature. Richard actually was brought up on a camp in the Midwest, and he was in the Navy, and then he worked in Alaska as a diesel mechanic for many years, and then he had an accident with his eye, and that was a turning point in his life, and he decided then to go to the Twin Lakes, to the wilderness of Alaska, and live by himself. This was a testing point for him, a real challenge. He had to decide whether he could live a solitary life like this, and whether he was equal to the nature, what nature would deliver to him out in the wilderness. We are his experience, and we are delighted to be able to show you this footage. This is all done with his camera. He took a couple cameras with him, and he would send back footage to his family so they could see what he was up to. We are delighted to be able to share this with you, and we know that you would like your very own copy for yourself. And you can do that by making a pledge of $120, and that way you will have your choice of either the DVD or the video, our way of saying thank you for supporting public television. We encourage you to go to the phone right now and call that toll-free number. Do it right now, 1-800-639-8303.
Dick Prenneke went in there and made a life for himself in the wilderness. It was really amazing to watch him, all the talents that he had, how he was so self-sufficient. But here at public television, we can't go out there and rub a couple of sticks together. We're a high-tech business, and we need your support. So we're asking for that right now. We've got a very special gift, a thank you gift to offer you tonight in relation to a very special pledge, thanks to Pete's RV, very generous of them. They're going to set up this camper that I'm here with at the DAR State Park. It's good for all of next season. You're going to get 2 days, 2 nights, sleep 6 people. The DAR State Park's on Lake Champlain. There's picnicking, there's sailing, there's boating, there's fishing, all the activities that you would enjoy with your family. And the best part about it is you don't have to drive the thing there. I know I've been intimidated from taking a camper, just saying, how do I back it up and so on. It's going to be all set up for you for a pledge of $350. It's a $500 value. You've got yourself a mini vacation set up for next summer. So give us a call. We'd like to hear from you right now at whatever level you can join us, whether it's at the member level or our higher level. Give us a call at 1-800-639-8303.
We're encouraging you to call right now and to support Vermont Public Television. And we are delivering this program right into your living room, hoping that you will help us pay for it by calling that number and becoming a member. We are sure that you would like your very own copy of this program, and we're here to offer it to you when you make a pledge of $120. Now, you can pay that on installment programs, use your MasterCard, your Visa, your American Express. We try to make it very easy for you. But the first step is for you to call the number on your screen. Then you have your choice of the DVD or the video of this actual program. Now, for your $60 pledge, we have the companion book. This is One Man's Wilderness. This is the story from his memoirs. Our thank you gift to you when you make that pledge of $60. And of course, we have a deal for you at the $150 level for those of you who can't make a choice, and for those of you who would really like to support Vermont Public Television. We will send you both of these, the video or the DVD and the book that goes along with it. But call us right now and let us know that programming like this is important to you. This is how it exists. Only because our viewers turn into members, you make it happen. And you have made it happen for years and years, and we are extremely grateful. But give us a call right now, 1-800-639-8303.
No matter how young or how old you are, you can enjoy the fun time at all 3 of VPT's Family Day events.
And if you're looking for deals, nothing beats the value of a VPT family membership. Just look at the savings you and your family will enjoy by becoming a family member.
It only takes a pledge of $50 to enjoy the savings and fun at all 3 of these great VPT Family Day events.
The Granby Zoo, Shelburne Museum, and Smuggler's Notch Resort all believe in VPT's mission of providing programs that inform, inspire, and educate.
They're involved in this partnership, and now we're inviting you to become involved.
Take advantage of these great savings and at the same time help support quality programming on VPT by becoming a family member. It's only $50. Call now.
You know, that family membership is just a terrific deal. $50. We have 3 events. You're invited to all 3. There's no charge, whether you choose the Shelburne Museum, Granby Zoo, or our big event that's coming up in September here at Smuggler's Notch. It's just a wonderful way to support Vermont Public Television that brings you the kind of programming you're watching tonight and have fun with your family. And speaking of family fun, we have a very special gift tonight in terms of saying thank you. If you can pledge at the $350 level, we're going to set you up, thanks to the generosity of Pete's Trailer Mart, Pete's RV, excuse me, 2 nights, 2 days at DAR State Park. It's a wonderful place. There's fishing, there's boating, there's sailing, there's historic sites nearby. You're right near Crown Point. A lot of wonderful activities for the family, and you'll be set up there for $350. It's a $500 value. Call us now with your pledge if you can.
For those of you who have already pledged, we thank you very, very much. You make it happen here at Vermont Public Television. Do you know that 57% of our income comes from the community, and the majority of that is from you, individual members, turning from viewers into supporting, contributing members of Vermont Public Television. You're investing in this service, and we are extremely grateful. You really make a difference to our service. Without you, we certainly wouldn't be here. But with you, we can provide you with the best of programming. And this is a very unique example tonight of the programming, the experience of living in the wilderness that you are watching tonight. This was actually made with his own home cameras. He went into the wilderness with 2 home cameras. He set 2 of them up sometimes, and then he would send the footage back to his family, and it was kept for many, many years. He went into the wilderness in 1968, and he came out just a few years ago, actually, just before his death. It's a wonderful experience, and we are sharing it with you because of your financial support. If you're not a member, give us a call, 1-800-639-8303.
We certainly would love to hear from you. The kind of programming that you're seeing tonight on the air is totally unique to public television. You're not going to find this kind of just compelling and very interesting program on commercial television. It's here on Vermont Public Television. So we'd love to hear if you're at a basic membership of $35, the family membership of $50, the wonderful thank you gifts that Leanne Lee was telling you about, all the welcome. Or if you can pledge at the level of $350, we're going to take advantage of Pete's RV's wonderful generosity here and set you up at the DAR State Park sometime in the summer of 2005. You pick the dates, and you'll have this wonderful camper there. It's Sleep 6. There's a stove. There's a dinette. There's showers, hot showers in toilets at the campground. Wonderful activities. There's all kinds of historic sites around. Fort Ticonderoga is near the area. You're not too far from Shelburne Museum. And it's be a wonderful thing for your family. And let's face it, at $350, it's a great cheap vacation next year, and you'll get the satisfaction of helping Vermont Public Television. Give us a call right now at 1-800-639-8303.
And you can help Vermont Public Television a couple different ways. If you make a pledge of $120, well, it's your choice of the DVD or the video of this program, one man's experience of leaving the civilized world and living in the wilderness for many, many years. Or for the your $60 pledge, the same experience in book version. And of course, for the deal, $150, we'll send you both the DVD or video along with the book. The important thing is that you call us and become involved in Vermont Public Television. And you know you can do it for as little as $35. $35 will make you a member. You will receive the program guide and our member card, allowing you discounts at many, over 150 organizations all throughout the viewing area. But the important thing is that you call and let us know that this service is important to you and that you realize that your support makes it happen. So give us a call. Let us know that you would like to be a member, you'd like to renew your membership, you'd like to make an additional gift. All it takes is a call from you. That number is 1-800-639-8303.
Operators are standing by during the upcoming program to take your call. If you'd rather mail in your pledge, write to one of the following addresses on the screen. Or you can pledge via our easy-to-use and secure website at vpt.org. Thanks for watching and supporting Vermont Public Television.
It's June 18th. Everything looks as though it had a bath last night. Must have been a good shower, and I never even heard it. A check on the livestock this morning before going down to the roof job. A few caribou cows and their calves just up country from Low Pass Creek. Nothing else in sight. Should be a bear passing through one of these days. These fillers should be called squirrel frustrators. Give those characters an entrance, and they can ruin a cabin. I finished filling the slots between the rough poles and caulk joints with oakum. I chinked around the blocks on the outside. Any place I could get a table knife blade in, got oakum. Next was a job I had been thinking about, a countertop. Some window ledges and some shelves. I decided ripping them with a rip saw was the answer. I could go down the middle of a log 5 inches in diameter and 42 inches long in 15 minutes. Couldn't complain about that. I think I have sawed nearly everything that I need. Now to trim the edges and start building. I need a fish for supper, so I took the fly rod down to Hope Creek. The grayling were feeding greedily, fins and tails swirling all over the surface. A fish snapped the fly from the leader the very first cast. A handsome grayling, 17¼ inches long, enough for my needs. It's July 2nd. After a peaceful trip down lake, I located 10 seasoned spruce stumps. I was anxious to try making hinges for the door. I worked the wood to shape with an axe and draw knife. Now to saw the fork in the butt end. "45 minutes and I had half my hinge made. Not bad. I put some finishing touches on the door planks I made Sunday. Now the door is ready to put together. Too many men work on parts of things. Doing a job to completion satisfies me. My roof poles are still too wet for the tar paper, so I will work on my double-deck bunk. 4 posts with 2 rails on each side and 2 large and 2 small on each end. I augured 1.5-inch holes and trimmed the rail poles to fit. Now, when I get some glue, I will knock it apart and glue it back together. With a few leftover poles, I built myself a chair and a bench. It's June 27th. A good rain it was last night. Today would be a pole hunting day. I need about 30 to make the slats for my bunks. After peeling the poles, the wind came up strong. It brought rain and it furrowed the lake as rough as a cob. This lake can really change its personality in a hurry, like a woman, all smiles 1 minute and dancing a temper tantrum the next. Tomorrow is Sunday. I will go someplace. Next morning, I loaded my camera gear and started up the trail to the hump. It was good to take a break away from the cabin. As I topped a ridge along a dry wash, a wolf came up from the other side, 30 or 40 paces away. Then in a wink, she was gone. The wolves had made a kill. All that was left of the young caribou was a backbone and rib cage. The skin was badly torn and pulled down over the front legs, as you would peel back a rubber glove. It looks like the wolves aren't the only problem the caribous have. What was a bull caribou doing down there where not a breath of air was stirring? Insects were whirling around me like sawdust blown from a power saw. The bull also was having a battle with the tiny fiends, stomping and shaking, twisting and turning, and shivering his hide. He would lie down and get back up again. No rest at all. Why doesn't he climb to a breeze or take a swim? Anything but stand and fight something that he can't hope to kill or scare away. With a yell and a waving of arms, I spooked him. He threw his antlers back and off he clattered over the stones and up the creek. Good luck to you, old boy. It's July 3rd, a cool, damp morning with fog coming off the slope like the smoke from many campfires. No wind now, so it's a perfect day for the tar paper job. I lapped the felt paper 4 to 5 inches. I need just one more strip, 20 feet long. I must admit the cabin looks better already with the start of a roof. Next, I unrolled the polyethylene and tucked the edges to get at least 4 thicknesses to tack through, and I fastened her down. Next, I built a carrying rack for the moss. I filed the blade of my round point shovel, and I was ready for the moss cutting detail. I cut out rectangles about 18 inches by 36 inches and 8 inches thick. 2 chunks double-decked on the rack made a good load. Once around the edge of the roof, and the cabin took on a new look. I feel guilty about the tar paper and the polyethylene because they're not true wilderness cabin materials. But I am convinced they will do a better job of keeping the weather out. It seems I have cleared 2 acres of moss, and still the roof isn't covered. A beautiful, still evening. The cabin is beginning to look as though it belongs. This morning I cut, hauled, and peeled 11 logs by noon. I would spend the day on the construction of the John, an important consideration in any new home. Materials to finish the front required lots of time, ripping boards from the last of my cabin logs. It was 12 o'clock when I finished the last cut. 4 boards would make the door, and the 5th would make cleats to hold it together. I made the hinges from a gas can, and they looked almost store-bought. And then the final touch, saw out the crescent, and the John was done. July 23rd, a day to hang the door. I put the door into the opening and fastened the top and bottom hinges. I checked and rechecked my hinges to see that they were in line. I pulled the hinge pins, set the door on the edge, and sawed it nearly through for a Dutch door, which I intended it to be. I daubed on some glue and nailed it fast. Door works quiet and easy, with all 4 hinges secure. Not perfect, but plenty close for rural work. I must devise a latch for it, not just hooks like a barn door. All I needed was a lock. I would like to see a bear try to figure this thing out. But I suppose he would just solve the problem by wiping the door clean from the wooden hinges. After finishing the latch, I went blueberrying up on the cowgill bench. I found a good patch. I fear the blueberries really took a nipping with the heavy frost not so long ago. I find some berries big and healthy, but many are small and shriveled. When my can was nearly full, I had noticed a movement across the creek. Something yellow and brown. A big bear, not 50 yards away. I think I picked the wrong blueberry patch. Lucky for me and him, he didn't like my smell. July 31st, a tin bending day. Made a water bucket, a wash pan, a dish pan, a flour pan, and storage cans. My cabin kitchen is shaping up. I needed a big wooden spoon to dip hotcake batter onto the griddle. 1 spoonful, 1 hotcake. In the woodpile, I found scraps of stump wood that looked suitable. It took me no more than an hour to turn out a good-looking spoon. I must make a wooden bowl or 2 later on. Today is the big day. I will load all my remaining gear into the canoe and paddle down to my new home. The lake is dead calm. A perfect day for moving. Everything found its place, and there was lots of room for everything. Not a cluttered look at all. 5 inches of foam rubber on my new bunk will make it just about right. I can hear Hope Creek real plain. That will be a pleasant sound to go to sleep by. And the view from my window isn't too bad either. Best sleep in a long time. The sound of the waves lapping the gravel beach and the never-ending rustle of Hope Creek. No better sleeping pill. The woodpile needs attention. I must drop a few spruce snags and buck them into sections. Dry standing timber makes the best firewood. There is a rhythm to the saw as its teeth eat back and forth into the deepening cut. But I must admit, I enjoy the splitting more. I heard a plane. It was Babe at last with supplies. He had brought in some fresh groceries that needed refrigeration. I had dug down a foot into the moss just yesterday and found frost, and lined the hole with a gas can box. The thermometer in my cooler box under the moss reads 40 degrees, and here it is close to 80 degrees today. While cultivating the garden, I rolled out a few potatoes that looked like walnuts. Not record breakers for size, but they had real smooth skins. The crops to grow at Twin Lakes are potatoes, rhubarb, lettuce, onions, and radishes. My green onions look pretty respectable. I am getting hungry for a fish. After many casts at the mouth of the Hope Creek, I was onto one. I worked him in easy, for I was fish hungry and I didn't want to lose this lake trout. I could see him browning in the pan as I dressed him out, and I left his entrails for the birds. Fried potatoes, onions, and fish. You can't beat that. Time to take a break away from the cabin. I would go up high today. There were many bands of sheep, ewes, and lambs scattered here and there. I spotted 6 big rams on Black Mountain. 2 had better than a full curl. A man could lose himself up here. One bad step and I would keep right on going down the mountain. But risk now and then is good for a man. One misstep here, and a man would have to settle with the Lord right here on the mountain. Close at hand, the mosses and grasses were full of tiny flowers. It is another world of beauty. The more I see as I sit here among the rocks, the more I wonder about what I am not seeing. A flickering movement off to my left. The stones seemed to move and turned into a mother ptarmigan and her brood. The young were just as camouflaged as their mother in her plumage of summer. They were feeding, huddled like chickens as they worked along the slope. Not too far away, I spotted a mother brown bear with 2 cubs. It was probably the same family I had seen at different times during the spring. She was rounded out like a cask. Must be lots of vitamins along those slopes. It was getting late and a little chilly, and it was time to leave. I had taken a long look into the heart of the high places. It's September 6th. This would be the morning to start the fireplace. I had been packing flat stones from the bed of Hope Creek for the past few days. The sound of geese heading north made me even more anxious to get the project underway. The lake was moon still. A good morning to haul some sand, 4 loads of sand. I won't cut that hole in the back of the cabin too high until I find out how this rock laying is going to go. Today is spent on the outside. The chimney is a good 12 inches high and 9 inches thick. I hated cutting into those logs that I had fitted with such care, but it had to be done. It's September 8th. I roughed out my arch today with my axe and then finished it off with a jack plane. I set it in place and spiked it to the posts. All my stones in front of the fireplace have been collected in my travels up and down both lakes, the high country and the low. So they are representative of the entire area. Today, while it was still frosty, I cut the notch in the rear overhang of the roof to let the chimney through. My collapsible form couldn't have worked better. I'm glad I took the time to make it. By tomorrow evening, I had better be done, since the last cement sack will be empty. After 2 weeks, with fingertips worn thin and tender, I am ready for the cold weather.
Prenneke loved people, but he loved wilderness and nature more. He would have truckers visit him from time to time, and they all said he was a wonderful host. Actually, he had bush pilots come by from time to time, drop him supplies and check on him. And
in the summer of 1858, the USS Niagara went to sea. Below decks, the warship carried an extraordinary cargo. 1,000 tons of copper wire, wrapped in enormous coils. The vessel also carried a 38-year-old self-made millionaire named Cyrus Field. For years, Field had been obsessed with a grand idea, a cable across the Atlantic. He had seen telegraph wires spread across the American landscape, but the Atlantic Ocean remained the ultimate barrier to instant communication. A message between New York and London still took at least 2 weeks to cross the sea. If Field could succeed, his Atlantic cable would revolutionize communication and transform international commerce. America would no longer be isolated from the rest of the world.
People talked a lot about the telegraph as the annihilator of space and time. I think what the cable anticipates is the idea of the wiring of the world, creating a neighborhood of the whole world.
The cable was a huge gamble. From the hazards of sailing ships to the mysteries of an unproved technology, Cyrus Field's transatlantic telegraph was never far from catastrophe.
Everyone knew it was a vast distance, of course, but what they hadn't appreciated was just how difficult this whole thing was. It was so much further than anything that had been attempted before. It was so much deeper.
As thousand-mile wires were brought together, Cyrus Field would learn a dark secret about his cable. After spending a fortune, he would be accused of committing fraud against 2 nations.
It was remarkable that he kept going through all that he managed to endure.
Cyrus Field's plan to connect the continents would call on the best scientists, the navies of 2 great powers, and the labor of thousands.
It was a very pretty plan on paper. God knows, none of us were aware of what we had undertaken.
A century before the internet, Cyrus Field would attempt to wire the world.
American Experience is made possible by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation to enhance public understanding of the role of technology. The foundation also seeks to portray the lives of the men and women engaged in scientific and technological pursuit.
At Liberty Mutual Insurance, we do everything we can to help prevent accidents and make America a safer place. Liberty Mutual is proud to support American Experience.
At the Scotts Company, we help make gardens more beautiful, lawns greener, trees taller. If there's a better business to be in, please let us know.
American Experience is also made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to make your way up to the table, don't be shy. Mr. Bishop, would you like to take your seat? This is the telegraphic apparatus. We're going to send a message through Berlin to St. Petersburg. Without further ado.
In 1856, Cyrus Field, a young American promoter, arranged a series of exclusive parties for some British investors. Field set up telegraph keys in private mansions around London and had his guests compose short messages.
Perhaps you would like to know what the weather is abroad.
These were sent by overland wires to other gatherings around Europe. After a few minutes, replies came in from as far away as Russia.
That's it, ladies and gentlemen. The message is now coming through. After 3 minutes. And the message is, the Tsar is most pleased with your inquiry and is in good health.
The novelty of communicating at a distance delighted Field's guests. In the 1850s, these parlor games were strong evidence that the world was shrinking. In less than a decade, the telegraph had become a boom industry in America. 20 years earlier, working alone in his New York artist studio, the painter Samuel Morse had tinkered with a mechanism for sending signals over short electrical wires. With primitive batteries for power, he devised a code of simple dots and dashes to represent the letters of the alphabet. In 1843, the U.S. government paid to string wires 35 miles from Washington to Baltimore. Within a few years, this first telegraph line had sprouted a system, stretching from Boston west to the Mississippi River. The era of instant communication was born.
The telegraph really transforms the marketplace in the United States rather quickly. Prices are known instantaneously around the country. So whereas it used to be that, say, the price of pork in Cincinnati was known only to people in Cincinnati or that region, the price of pork in Cincinnati with the telegraph is now known in New York at the same time. The market is nationalized. It is no longer dependent on space because space has in effect been annihilated.
Although New York and New Orleans could now communicate, oceans isolated the cities of America from the rest of the world. The telegraph had shrunk the continent, but international news was still carried by wind and sail. Ships would leave New York Harbor with mail and dispatches bound for London weeks away. The telegraph ended at the docks of Lower Manhattan. At an office block facing these docks, Cyrus Field had built a successful international company by the time he was 30. The son of a prominent New England clergyman, Field's family included important judges and social reformers. But as a young man, Cyrus Field chose a different path. While still a boy, he came to New York to seek his fortune.
When Cyrus Field was 16 years old, he wanted to go into business, and his father arranged for him to be apprenticed to A.T. Stewart, who was a merchant in New York, and Stewart had more or less invented the department store. Cyrus Field spent 3 years as an apprentice, and then he went into business on his own when he was about 20, in the wholesale paper business. He bought one that was failing. He had to reorganize it and settle the debts on something like 30 cents on the dollar. Within a few years, he was very successful and was making money, and he paid these debts he had no legal obligation to pay. And this gave him an enormous reputation. I mean, this was not something that happened every day.
He combines the background of sort of Calvinist, strict Protestant education with the bustle, the excitement, the opportunity of commercial New York.
Business was rapidly increasing. The opportunities made available by the Industrial Revolution were almost without end. The word millionaire was coined in 1827 to give a name to these people who had made fortunes outside of land. By the time Field was 30 years old, he was a rich man, and he was able to build a mansion on Gramercy Park, a very fashionable part of New York City at that time, still is.
Field wed a young woman from Connecticut, and together they moved into their newly built mansion on Gramercy Park. Here, Mary Stone Field would raise their 7 children. A newspaper declared Cyrus Field the 33rd richest man in town.
He started doing out his house at Gramercy Park and had an English butler and European china and beautiful trimmings and drapes, and was thoroughly bored. He wanted something else in his life.
Although still in his 30s, Field removed himself from the day-to-day management of his paper company.
He was sort of looking around for something to do, and his brother, who was an engineer, brought over a man who was involved in a scheme to build a telegraph across Newfoundland and then run a cable across the Cabot Strait to Nova Scotia, so that ships could stop at St. John's in Newfoundland and they could telegraph the news ahead to New York. News coming from Europe could get to North America 2 days faster. Field actually was not terribly impressed with that idea. But then he happened to look at a globe, and he just noticed that Newfoundland is right on the Great Circle route to England, and he just suddenly thought to himself, well, why don't we lay a cable across the Atlantic? And then we wouldn't save 2 days, we'd save 12 days and have the news instantly.
This is where ignorance
is great, is beneficial. It's, you know, if you can run a line that far, why don't you just run it the rest of the way? And the fact that it's underwater, you know, what difference does it make? It's, it should be possible.
With no knowledge of the ocean or the telegraph, Field began 1854 by writing to a Lieutenant Matthew Murray.
Matthew Fontaine Murray was the director of the Naval Observatory in Washington and the great American oceanographer. He almost invented the science of oceanography. He wrote to Murray asking if it was possible to lay a line across the Atlantic Ocean, and Murray wrote back saying, funny you should ask, because I had a ship out there all summer taking soundings, and we found this nice flat area perfect for laying a cable. In fact, we've named it the Telegraph Plateau.
With Lieutenant Murray's surprising encouragement, Field began to consider the scale of the project. A primitive 27-mile line under the English Channel had just been laid. An Atlantic cable would need to be 100 times longer.
Field realized he was going to need much more money than he himself could possibly invest in such a scheme, that it was going to be a very large undertaking. But fortunately, on Gramercy Park, he had lots of very rich neighbors, especially Peter Cooper, who was an ironmonger who had made an enormous fortune, probably one of the 2 or 3 richest men in New York City at that time.
Peter Cooper was old enough to be Field's father, but they shared similar backgrounds. Cooper also shared Field's belief that business was akin to religion in its power to benefit the world.
Peter Cooper was a very religious man. He had always thought that the purpose of business was to make money and the purpose of life was to do good.
The bottom of the sea between Newfoundland and Ireland is a plateau, which seems to have been placed there especially to hold the wires of a submarine telegraph and to keep them out of harm's way.
In March 1854, with little planning or research, Cyrus Field brought together Cooper and a few other influential neighbors, hoping they would back his cable.
They were very savvy businessmen. They trusted Field because he had been a very successful businessman, even though he was young. His greatest advantage was his drive and his energy and his determination to get things done.
Clearly he wanted to see a return, and clearly he tried to convince investors that they would get a return. But there's something more to it than that. It's not just about money. It's about, I think, a desire to make a mark in the world, and also the sense that once you've made your pile, once you've made your money, you still have obligations to service, to try to improve life for people and so on and so forth.
It's quite common, isn't it, for business people to explain their actions in terms other than making money. There were people who saw the good that would come out of this project, but they did also have a very strong eye on the bottom line. This was never philanthropy, this was always a business opportunity.
Field's enthusiasm was contagious. The group chartered a small corporation with an imposing name, the New York, Newfoundland, and London Telegraph Company. After posing for a formal portrait, the Gramercy Park cable investors toasted their project and pledged the vast sum of $1.5 million. Years later, Field wrote of that meeting, "God knows none of us were aware of what we had undertaken." Field's first task would be bridging the 60-mile Cabot Strait, separating Newfoundland from the rest of Canada. After wrecking a small ship, the new cable company was forced to spend almost all its original capital just stringing a wire through the wilderness to Newfoundland's eastern shore.
Not one of us had ever seen the country. On a map, it was easy to draw a line from one point to the other, ignoring the forests, the mountains and rivers that lay in our way.
Cyrus Field succeeded in bringing the telegraph to Newfoundland, but for his company, the first year was a financial disaster. It was clear that he had grossly underestimated the scope of the project. By the fall of 1855, the telegraph line ended on the Canadian shore. Cyrus Field was out of money, out of cable, and still 2,000 miles from Europe. If his dream was to become a fact, Field needed more money than his New York backers could contribute. In 1856, the American arrived in London, prepared to promise anything to sell more shares. To bankers, he claimed his cable would bring an 8% return. To idealists, it would bring world peace. On a sales mission to a wealthy lord's country estate, he even compared his telegraph to a hunting dog.
The plan of which I've spoken is essentially just a dog. If you pinch his tail in London, he'll let out a bark in New York.
I think that because Field was an American, and because he was very direct and open and went straight to the point, he was able to mix in these different strata of British society in a way that perhaps someone British couldn't have done. He actually went to see the First Lord of the Admiralty and said, "Can you give me a boat?" The Admiralty at this time was rather short of boats, didn't have too many to spare, but they said, yes, okay. Now, I can't imagine an English person would ever have done that, because this is a very direct way to... They may have written a polite letter saying, oh, by the way, and it probably wouldn't have had any effect, but Field knew he needed a boat, went off and got one.
Field needed more than British boats and money. He needed access to a rare British-made substance, gutta percha. This foul-smelling tropical sap was used to protect electrical cable, and a London company monopolized most of the gutta percha trees in the world.
Absolutely critical to this enterprise with gutta percha. It's like rubber, it comes out of a tree, but it's a plastic. If you take gutta percha and you just put it in hot water, it will begin to soften, and then you can mold it in whatever shape, and then you cool it down and it keeps that shape.
And this way it can be used as a coating on copper wire. The nature of gutta percha was that it was a good insulator. So the cable was a piece of copper wire coated with this gutta percha, and then having an outer covering of iron wire wound round it as a protection.
Insulated cable would weigh 1 ton per mile, and no single ship was big enough to carry the entire 2,500-ton load. Most experts doubted that existing cable would operate over such a distance, but one consultant claimed he could make it work. Cyrus Field hired as chief electrician a medical doctor named Edward Orange Wildman Whitehouse.
Dr. Whitehouse was a physician by trade, but he was an amateur telegrapher. He knew a great deal about telegraphy, there's no doubt about that. Unfortunately, he was one of those people who just could not be wrong about anything.
He was a very outspoken man, and a man of very definite ideas. Indeed, he was a member of that group who believed that if electricity had to travel a long distance, it needed a jolly good kick to get it on its way.
Electricity was still a mystery in the 1850s. Before the light bulb, most people knew electricity only from thunderstorms or magic shows. Whether a current could even flow through a 2,000-mile undersea cable was completely uncertain.
There were many people who thought it wasn't possible. Indeed, the British Astronomer Royal, Sir George Biddulary, declared that it was quite impossible to do this because at the great depths of the ocean, the electric fluid would be squeezed out of the cable.
Dr. Whitehouse insisted that the Atlantic cable would work, but only if a strong enough current were applied. Field was convinced that Whitehouse's system of robust batteries was the key to success. Others cautioned Field that there needed to be more testing. But Dr. Whitehouse was so sure of his theories, and Field knew any delay would cost money. Money that he didn't have. With his British funders in place, Field sailed home to America. His next job was to get the support of his own government. For months, he lobbied most of the United States Congress, writing home that he would rather be surrounded by Newfoundland's icebergs than Washington's politicians.
He was talking as though America really was still a backwater, isolated by its lack of communication. And he was saying, look, you know, if I stand on the west coast of Ireland, I can send a message almost instantaneously to anywhere on the European mainland, down into Africa, across the Asian continent. But here in America, you can only really talk to each other. You're cut off from the rest of world commerce.
Although many legislators argued that Britain ought to pay the entire bill for Field's scheme, the Atlantic Cable Act passed the Senate by a single vote. Congress ordered the United States Navy to provide assistance. Late in 1857, the Navy loaned the USS Niagara to the Atlantic Telegraph Company. Powered by a combination of steam and sail, the Niagara was the largest such vessel in the world. After being fitted with new machinery and with Cyrus Field aboard, the U.S. ship sailed for a rendezvous point in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Here she met her British counterpart, the HMS Agamemnon, each carrying one half of the cable. With both ships at the meeting point, riggers joined the cable. Strand by strand, the wires were carefully connected, and a copper penny was soldered in for luck. On July 29, 1858, a test signal was telegraphed from the Agamemnon to the Niagara. That afternoon, the ships sailed off in opposite directions.
You're captain of the Niagara, and you've got to take a cable across to the middle of the Atlantic to Newfoundland. It sounds so easy. You've got 1,200 miles of cable, simply drop it to the base of the ocean, but it isn't as easy as that. First of all, you've got some 20,000 feet of water to go down. You've got a ship moving forward, and we want to make sure that the cable isn't too tight. If it's too tight, it'll probably break. If it's too loose, it'll just snake its way down to the base of the ocean and end up a big coil on the base. And you have to match the speed of the ship with the required laying speed of the cable. And you have to keep going at this sort of speed regardless of what happens at the top.
On board the Niagara, telegraphers sent hourly test signals to the Agamemnon. As long as one ship could hear the other, the cable was working. If the signal should ever stop, their mission would be a failure.
Latitude 52 degrees north, longitude 32 degrees west. Signals through the entire cable on board both ships. Perfect.
For 8 days, the Agamemnon and Niagara sailed east and west. The first time in history that two ships had maintained contact beyond the horizon. The Niagara sent routine weather reports. The Agamemnon replied that whales were following the ship. Then, one morning, there was a crisis aboard the Niagara. Officers discovered serious navigational errors. The ship had laid out too much cable for the distance covered. At that rate, they would run out of cable before making Newfoundland.
It seems that the compass has been affected by the amount of iron. The cables were sheathed with iron, therefore the compass get deviated from its north position.
Without a reliable compass, the navigator needed to constantly check his position, fighting to keep the ship on track. Even as cargo, the cable itself was posing a challenge.
Field had no technological background whatsoever. He said later that it was fortunate for him that he didn't know anything about the problems of undersea cables because he never would have gotten involved in the project.
At sea, Cyrus Field had time to reflect on his cable adventure. For most of the last 4 years, he'd left his wife and family alone. He had convinced his Gramercy Park neighbors to entrust him with their money, and he had lost nearly every penny. Now he'd gotten a host of new investors and was again stretched to the limit with an unperfected technology. For a minister's son who had built his reputation on pure trust, he was in a difficult spot.
I was standing on the deck of the Niagara in mid-ocean, and when I thought of all my hopes, thus far disappointed, of the friends saddened by my reverses, I felt a load on my heart, almost too heavy to bear.
After 8 days and nearly 1,000 miles, the Niagara entered Trinity Bay, Newfoundland. The cable had arrived in North America. From a small shed on the beach, Field sent a 4-word message to New York. The cable is laid. From the cable office on Wall Street, the word spread quickly as the telegraph carried the news to towns around the United States. Newspapers from Maine to Missouri printed extra editions. While Field prepared to return from Newfoundland to New York, the Agamemnon arrived off the coast of Ireland. As the electrician Edward Whitehouse watched, the European end of the cable was hauled ashore.
They set up a tent. All the electrical equipment was put in place, and Whitehouse and his colleagues were given free access to the cable to get it into working order.
Queen Victoria composed a ceremonial telegram to President James Buchanan. One of Dr. Whitehouse's first tasks was to send her words across the Atlantic. When the Queen's message arrived, America began celebrating. New Yorkers sensed a new age had dawned. 2 continents had been joined.
They were used to having the Atlantic Ocean be 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 weeks wide. And suddenly, here it was 10 minutes wide. And it was just a miracle.
there were these huge spontaneous demonstrations that took place. Bonfires, fireworks, street parades, tens of thousands of people marching up Broadway, immigrant groups, temperance societies, working men's clubs, all essentially sharing in this notion of this is an American triumph. This is something that is uniquely American. There's an American genius at work here.
From the family home in Massachusetts, Field's brother sent a message. Cyrus, your father danced like a boy, and all over town bells are being rung. The joyful news has nearly overwhelmed your wife and family. A few blocks from the parades, Cyrus Field was not celebrating. From the first test signals, something seemed to be wrong. Even the Queen's short message had taken hours to transmit. As time passed, the signals across the Atlantic became fainter. In Ireland, Dr. Whitehouse's response was to add more and more batteries to the circuit, cranking up the amount of current passing through the cable.
Batteries with 500 volts. And then induction coils, maybe 2,000 volts. The poor cable. It was not going to be able to withstand that, but nobody knew.
In Newfoundland, the signals became intermittent. Words were garbled. Whole phrases missed.
How do you receive? Can you read this? Please send something.
The clipped, imperfect sounds of the telegraph told Cyrus Field that Europe and America were once again cut off. After just 23 days of operation, somewhere on the dark floor of the North Atlantic, his cable had failed.
After all this outpouring of enthusiasm, after these huge, lavish banquets, after all the honors that are being laid on Field, the cable goes dead. Immediately, many people, many newspapers and others start to say, well, maybe this whole thing was a hoax. Maybe this whole thing was just a big stock fraud. Maybe this was the kind of thing that we associate with P.T. Barnum, humbug.
A Boston newspaper accused Field of profiting by dumping his stock before the cable failed. The minister's son was forced to defend his own integrity.
Cyrus Field must have been absolutely devastated, because if we convert the sort of cost of the cable at that time into the hundreds of millions of dollars that it would cost today, and that is an investment which is gone.
And even if you found out that there was a problem, you know, that it's a fault in the cable someplace, a break in the cable, if there was a single thing, you can't do anything about it. There's no way of going and picking up the cable and repairing it.
Overnight, Cyrus Field went from being the toast of New York to a laughingstock. Newspapers, which a month earlier had hailed him, now called him a man obsessed by insanity. Field knew that for now, his Atlantic cable was lost. But from his mansion, he sent a short, confident note to his investors.
Our cable is not dead, but only slumbers. Someday, she will answer the call.
A few weeks after the cable's failure, a letter arrived from London. The scale of the debacle forced the British and American governments to call a board of inquiry to find out what had gone wrong. Field was summoned to explain himself.
This is the very first time after a technological failure that a board of inquiry was convened. It was such a good idea that every time since, the first thing they do is summon a board of inquiry, whether it was when the Titanic sank in 1912 or the Challenger blew up in 1986. They found all kinds of things wrong. They found that the cable was badly designed, that it had not been properly tested in real conditions, in water of the right temperature and at the right pressure.
There is a problem with long cables, there is a problem with deep cables, not just in laying them, but actually getting them to work once they have been laid.
The board's suspicions focused on the electrician, Dr. Whitehouse. When he hooked his powerful batteries to the Irish end of the cable, he forced so much power through the line that he blasted a hole through the gutta-percha insulation somewhere on the ocean floor. The entire 2,000-mile system had been turned into a wet clothesline.
Whitehouse really was set up as the person to take the blame. He continued after that to protest that he had been right when it was becoming increasingly clear that he didn't actually know what he was doing.
One of the most important things that the Board of Inquiry did was to discover that there was no adequate vocabulary in which to discuss technical details of electrical engineering. And within the next few years, a whole raft of words entered the English language, words like watt and volt and ohm and ampere, that were all named for great pioneers in the history of electricity.
Field replaced Whitehouse with Professor William Thomson, a brilliant Scottish physicist, later known as Lord Kelvin. Thomson thought what was needed was an instrument to detect very weak signals. The electricity at the far end of the cable was too faint to produce a conventional click. Thomson struggled for a way to catch the signal.
He was in his study one day and he was thinking about something, standing at his desk, and he happened to be twirling his monocle. He noticed that the light coming in the window was reflecting off the monocle and a light spot was zooming around the room.
Suddenly, Thomson realized what was needed. His assistant attached a tiny glass reflector to an iron wire. By focusing a kerosene flame on the mirror, even the slightest movement of the wire could be made visible. The ingenious mirror galvanometer could detect signals 1,000 times fainter than other receivers. Although Dr. Whitehouse had taken the fall for the cable's failure, the board also faulted Cyrus Field's impulsiveness. If Field was to try another cable, it would have to be based on solid physics.
Field was blinkered and he didn't perhaps take on all the information that was available to him. But in another way, he drove the project forward through his own energy and his own abilities to actually harness the people who needed to be involved. There was a very big problem when he turned back to the cable and tried to get it moving again. He said this was his darkest hour, really, when people wouldn't listen to him. Many people had lost a great deal of money and weren't willing to throw more after it. Field was forced to go back to London and really concentrate his efforts in Britain.
I think you can tell Field's character when it comes to failure when the British foreign minister asked him before this all started what he would do if it failed, and he said charge it up to profit and loss and start again.
He never let up. This is also, I think, part of the salesman part of Field. No matter how bad things were looking, no matter how much money was lost, no matter what disaster befell the cable project, his optimism seemed to be unshakable. His faith in the ultimate success must have been inspirational to other people and given them confidence to keep investing.
By the time Field had raised new capital in Britain, his own country had exploded. In April 1861, civil war broke out in America. While it tore the nation apart, the war's use of battlefield telegraph equipment also demonstrated the power of good communication. When peace came to America in 1865, Field and his backers resumed the cable project with new vigor.
They had a great stroke of luck. The greatest engineer of the 19th century, with a wonderful name of Isambard Kingdom Brunel, said, "Mr. Field, I have the ship to lay your cable." In 1858, he launched the Great Eastern, which was not only the largest ship in the world, it was 5 times the size of any ship in the world. Brunel's original idea was to build a ship large enough to steam from England to Australia and back without having to recoal. It turned out that it was a commercial disaster. Nobody wanted particularly to go to Australia, even without having to recoal. And on the Atlantic run, it was just too big to make money. Field realized immediately it would be perfect because it was the only ship in the world that could carry all the cable in one go.
Field and his British backers were able to buy the bankrupt Great Eastern for only 2% of what it had cost to build. The one ship in the world big enough to alone lay the entire cable was now in Field's hands. Compared to the attempt of 1858, the Great Eastern would be a voyage of luxury. For weeks, at a dock in London, 7,000 tons of continuous cable was spooled into the holds of the great ship.
There was no longer any need to worry about mid-ocean splicing with another boat. It was all on one ship. The Great Eastern was so huge that the cable apparently was lost in the hold.
A decade earlier, Cyrus Field had begun with a small gathering in his own parlor. Now he was about to set sail in the world's largest ship with dozens of technicians and the finest equipment 19th century science could provide. The European end of the new cable ran from the same Irish Bay as in 1858. With Field on deck, the Great Eastern steamed toward Newfoundland, 2,000 miles over the horizon.
Field was the only American on the expedition. There were hundreds of men on the Great Eastern, and there was only one American, and that was Cyrus Field.
Everybody wanted Cyrus Field there because everybody knew that he was the man who was going to make this all come together. He was the classic entrepreneur, which is, in many ways, it's like a producer of a Broadway show. I mean, the producer doesn't write, he doesn't act, he doesn't paint scenery, he doesn't do anything except make it possible for all the others to come together and have the show. Without the producer, there's no show.
Alone with his thoughts on the 2-week voyage, Cyrus Field took time to record his impressions in his daily journal.
There's a wonderful sense of power in the great ship. We are trailing a slender conduit through which lightning will flash with the news and passions of 2 mighty nations.
Always with the gift for promotion, Field brought along an artist to record the voyage of the Great Eastern.
The advantage of the Great Eastern and carrying all the cable is you start at Ireland and you head for Newfoundland, but you're hooked up. In other words, through this 2,000 miles of cable, you've got a receiver and transmitter on ship and then the same at shore. So all the time they were in contact with each other as they were sailing away.
Every mile they went, they had a new record for the length of functioning submarine cable. They knew what was going on in Ireland, and Ireland knew what was going on the ship at every moment.
At 1 a.m. on the 6th night of the voyage, the telegrapher in Ireland failed to receive the Great Eastern's hourly signal. Minutes later, 1,000 miles in mid-ocean, Field was summoned to the ship's telegraph shed. The signals from Ireland had disappeared. The circuit had broken. Desperate to save the project, the captain of the Great Eastern attempted an impressive piece of seamanship. The huge 700-foot ship reversed course on the high seas and backtracked 40 miles. A grappling hook was dropped over the side. After several passes, the cable was snared from the ocean floor. The crew attached the wire to a massive winch and slowly raised it 3 miles to the surface. Field watched as the cable was inspected foot by foot. Small metal spikes had pierced the gutta-percha covering. Some on board feared sabotage. But the problem proved to be a defect in manufacturing. Miles of bad line were cut out of the circuit, and a flash from the galvanometer told them that contact with Ireland had been re-established. Field's cable was rescued.
It has been a long, hard struggle. Nearly 13 years of ceaseless toil. Often my heart has been ready to sink. Alone, far from home, I have accused myself of madness to sacrifice the peace of my family. But all the hopes have led me on, and I have prayed that I might not taste of death till this work was accomplished.
At dawn on the 14th day, the Great Eastern entered the rugged Newfoundland Bay. The cable was brought ashore at the village of Heart's Content and wired into the North American grid. Cyrus Field sent a short message simultaneously to backers in New York and London. Arrived Newfoundland 9 this morning. All well. Thank God the cable is laid. A few hours later, he sent a personal message to his wife at their home in Gramercy Park.
The cable has been hauled ashore and is in perfect working order. Now, we shall be a united family again.
It was remarkable that he kept going through all that he managed to endure. And I do think it was something ahead of its time. I think without his commitment at that point, it could have taken years longer to put into place.
Direct communication between Britain and America has never been broken since that morning in 1866.
In a lot of contemporary illustrations, you've got the Lion of England, the Eagle of the United States joined. It helps to cement Anglo-American culture, and it helps to create really what you might call the Victorian world, which is united by this cable. The idea that news going from London to New York or other parts of the world eventually, this is something we take for granted now. And again, it's hard to imagine how amazing that seemed back then.
The idea of the wiring of the world, creating a neighborhood of the whole world. I think what the cable anticipates is that sense of connectedness, everything being connected, which is so common in everyday life today.
The cable was the great event of Cyrus Field's life. I mean, by the time it was finally finished and successful, he was nearing 50 years of age. And he became very, very rich because of it. He was worth around $6 million by 1880, which in those days made you very rich indeed. He then lost much of it in Wall Street, but he was still world famous, honored wherever he went.
Cyrus Field's 1866 cable carried 1,000 messages per month at up to $10 a word. By the time Field died in 1892, there were a dozen telegraph cables across the Atlantic. Even today, most communication between America and Europe is still carried by transatlantic cable.
There is more on the transatlantic cable.
5 million non-Jews were also murdered, among them gypsies, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, Christian activists, and anyone else deemed politically or racially undesirable. One young girl who lived through 6.5 years in concentration and transit camps was Marion Blumenthal Lazan. At the time of her liberation, she was 10 years old and weighed 35 pounds. Today, Marion travels the world to tell her story, fully aware that she is part of the last generation of living Holocaust survivors.
They say that one of the best ways to learn about something is to experience it, unless the experience is so horrifying that you wouldn't wish it upon your worst enemy. In that case, the next best way to learn is to listen carefully to someone who has experienced it firsthand. You're about to step back in time to a terrible period of world history. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Lazan.
Mine is a story that Anne Frank might have told had she lived. It is a story of perseverance, determination, faith, and above all, hope. Life in the early 1930s in Germany was very much for my family as it is here for most of you today. Never did we think that the anti-Semitic incidents there would ever lead to very much. It's my grandparents who lived in this little town of Hoya. It is a very small town of a few thousand in population, just a bit north of the city of Hanover in Germany. They had a very successful, thriving shoe business. They lived very comfortably there and had many dear friends in this little town, many non-Jewish friends.
Ruth Blumenthal gave birth to her first child, Albert, in 1932. 2 years later, Marion followed.
Papa had some good friends in Hoya.
Used to have good friends, even in the neighbor next door, Ali. He was a drinker. And your father had to take care of him next door. And then they were the most horrible anti-Semites you can see.
I think he fought in the First World War with Father.
That's how close they were.
Yeah,
so they fought.
They were friends from children because they grew up together.
The way the story goes, Father saved his ass many, many times.
Oh, yeah. Many times.
Right.
And then
during the war.
During the war.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Right.
And then as soon as the barn shorts came and the anti-Semitism came about, he turned against.
He turned against them, yeah.
Turned against them.
He swallowed that crap. Hook, line, sinker, and all the Nazi propaganda.
It's understandable that some of them felt that they needed to protect themselves, and that's the reason why they turned against us, but it didn't have to be done in such a vicious manner, and that's what hurts. And then, of course, little by little, we felt the difference when the Nuremberg laws came about. Restrictions were put upon our people and the Jewish people. It was the beginning of a massive program against the Jewish people. Massive mental and physical assault. The Nuremberg laws consisted in part of Jewish people not being allowed into swimming pools and into parks and into theaters, and schools, public schools were closed to Jewish children. There was a curfew at night. Non-Jewish people were not allowed to shop in Jewish-owned stores. And these restrictions went on, and then this big letter J for Jew was stamped on ID cards and on passports. In fact, there was a boycott. There were the brown shirts. They were part of the Nazi party. And they would stand in front of our store to make sure that no one was to come in to shop. So business was out. My father was stripped of all the dignity that was so much a part of his life. My parents had wanted to leave early. As soon as they saw the danger and the difficulties arising, they wanted to leave. But we lived with my grandparents above the shoe store. They could not leave because they were ill and elderly, and they couldn't understand the necessity of leaving either. And then when they passed away in 1938, it was February of 1938, as soon as they passed away, within 11 days of each other, we received our necessary papers to leave Germany. And I was 4 years old at that time. We first went to Hanover, the nearest large town. There we made additional arrangements to emigrate to the United States by way of Holland. While in Hanover, Kristallnacht came about. November 9th, 1938. That's when the Nazis destroyed synagogues, Jewish stores, burned books, Jewish books, and that was a massive assault against the Jewish people.
In Berlin, wie in anderen Universitätsstädten Deutschlands, wurden undeutsche und unsittliche Bücher von den Studenten eingesammelt und öffentlich verbrannt.
The night of Kristallnacht, my father was taken away from us. And he was sent to a concentration camp in Buchenwald. And at that time, terrible stories were related to my mother. And we really did not know if we would ever see my father again. Because all men, all Jewish men were taken away. And we know that some did not return, but my father was released after 10 days because we had our necessary papers for our immigration. Once we arrived in Holland to emigrate to America, we were first incarcerated in Camp Westerbork in Holland, which was constructed by the Dutch to accommodate Jews from various parts of Europe, mainly from Germany.
Albert and Marion were very young when we had to go to Westerbork. After all, it was Holland, and it was a friendly place. and we didn't know what was ahead of us.
Under Dutch jurisdiction, Westerbork was tolerable. Adults were assigned to various work duties. My father worked to repair shoes, and we children had a makeshift education, but generally lived a very dull, stagnant life. I was 5 years old at that time. It was just a month or so before we were to sail ship from Rotterdam to the United States that the Germans invaded Holland. And then, of course, we were trapped.
Albert has never spoken publicly about his experience during World War II until now.
And most of our days during the week were spent going to school. And on our time off, we were scrounging for food, were playing football. We did not feel or sense the horror that the adults sensed.
But when the Germans took over Westerbork, that's when we became acquainted with that terrifying 12-foot-high barbed wire. It was a horror to be surrounded by barbed wire.
Over 100,000 Jews were interned in Westerbork for shipping to other more notorious camps. Among them was Anne Frank, who was held there after her arrest, then sent to Auschwitz, and finally to Bergen-Belsen, where she died of typhus. Marion, her brother Albert, and their parents Walter and Ruth spent 4 long years in Westerbork as prisoners, and as the war raged across Europe, conditions only got worse.
And soon thereafter, transports came in from various parts of Europe, but mainly from Holland. These people were taken from their hiding places or from their homes and were sent to Westerbork. And then it was early 1942 when the dreadful transports to the extermination and concentration camps began.
In January of 1944, 9-year-old Marion and her family had their spirits raised at last. Through the Swiss Red Cross, they were chosen to be exchanged for German nationals held in British-controlled Palestine. And so they were sent back to Germany, the country that they had fled more than 4 years earlier, to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, where the exchange would be processed. But the prisoner exchange program would only be a cruel false hope for the Blumenthals.
It was pitch black, bitter cold, a rainy night. I remember it well. And we were pulled out of those cattle cars. I remember holding a rag doll in my arms. Later on became more rag than doll. I remember my brother, always close by my side. He was always very protective of me. I remember there was a girl who wanted my doll, and I wouldn't give it to her. And my brother helped me to defend myself.
The nightmare hit us in Belsen.
We arrived in the camp, and of course, on that platform, we were greeted by the guards. Mean-looking men with these high black boots that almost came to my eye level, with big German shepherds. It was frightening. For a 9-year-old, very frightening. We arrived in Bergen-Belsen in February of 1944, and it was in May of that year, I believe, that the first exchange was to take place. And we, at that point, all of us who were on the list were sent to a different area of Bergen-Belsen. It was a very exciting time for us to know that we were just about to get out and leave Bergen-Belsen. The time came for the lists to be called out for the exchange, and they started with the alphabet, A, B, and so on. The A's were red. The B's were red. No Blumenthals. The C's and so on. No Blumenthals. My father, at that point, stepped forward and actually saluted this Nazi commandant. He was the head of the camp or of this particular situation. My father explained that he served in during World War I and so on and so forth. And I have a request. I need to know, perhaps you missed the name Blumenthal. It wasn't called out. Perhaps you missed the name. He had some very ugly words to say to my father. He abused my father, called him Schweinehund, and told him to get back into where he was standing back into line. In actuality, there were 200 and some people who were exchanged, but we were not among them. And we had to go back along with a number of other families, back to the old grounds of Bergen-Belsen, where we had been before. And it was an enormous disappointment. And to think that only a few years prior, he was awarded the Iron Cross for his military service during World War I. I remember the first time seeing a wagon filled with what I thought was firewood for the one small oven that we had in our barrack. That oven, of course, was never used. I soon realized that what was in the wagon and what was being hauled away were dead, naked bodies, thrown one on top of the other. At the beginning, it wasn't all that, smell wasn't all that terrible, but it didn't take long for that terrible odor to come about because there were no showers. There were no baths. We were never able to brush our teeth. And people died very, very soon from typhus, from dysentery, and that's where the odor came in. They couldn't bury them fast enough, so they had the crematorium, because the bodies were burned. Every morning, it never failed. Every morning we had to line up. It was ridiculous. People died every day. I don't know how they could keep count in an accurate manner, but it didn't matter to them. It was just another way to make life difficult. We would have to stand at attention all day long at times, without food, without water, in all kinds of weather. We didn't have warm clothing to protect us against the bitter cold. Frostbite was common. And all that we had to treat the frostbites of our fingers and of our toes was the warmth of our own urine.
All that I distinctly remember is grubbing for food and being very imaginative of how to find it. There are all kinds of ways of doing it. Cleaning up these big steel containers. They were put outside the kitchen door. As soon as the old container was back there, went in there. And occasionally we found some potatoes at the bottom of it, and piece of meat and some soup, and whenever I could, I brought it back to us. But grubbing for food was the mainstay of my life. I saw this old German in uniform, and I kind of walked with him on the inside of the camp, and he walked on the outside with his rifle. And we had a chat, and he said, "I've got something for you." And he pulled out an apple, and he gave it to me.
We know what would have happened to him had he been caught doing that. He certainly would have been punished. He might have lost his life even. But out of the goodness of his heart, he gave my brother an apple. And that apple was divided into so many pieces. So it proves that they were not all bad.
And I certainly appreciated the apple. That was a real treat. We didn't see any fruit or anything like that, and this was very unusual.
As time went on, it became harder and harder for us to deal with the cold, with the filth, with the disease, with the lice. Washing facilities were non-existent. Toilets were long wooden benches with holes cut into them, one next to the other. We had no privacy. We had no toilet paper. We had no soap, and there was hardly ever any water with which to wash. And in the almost year and a half that we were in Bergen-Belsen, never once were we able to brush our teeth. There were no trees, no flowers, nor did we ever see a blade of grass. And whenever it rained, we had to slush through the mud, adding even more misery to our already dismal existence. All this brought on disease and dysentery and lice. My pastime was squashing those lice between my thumb nails. People did try at times to escape, and we saw their dead bodies hanging electrocuted against the barbed wire. Nazis did their utmost to break us physically, spiritually, mentally, and death was constant. We often tripped and fell over the dead people. The nights were horrendous. People moaned and cried. We had one little bunk. There were triple-decker bunk beds with 2 people sharing each bunk. And I was very lucky. I know how lucky I was that I was able to share a bunk with my mother. But of course, I spent hours alone while she was at work. And I passed my time with make-believe games. And there was one game. It was a game of superstition, which became very important to me. I decided that if I were to find 4 pebbles of about the same size and shape, that would mean that the 4 members of my family would all survive. My mother, my father, my brother, and I. It was a hard game to play. What if I didn't find the 3rd or 4th pebble? I was afraid that might mean that 1 or 2 of my family members would not pull through. But somehow this game gave me something to hold on to, some distant hope. And I always found my 4 pebbles. Made it my business to find the 4 pebbles. I cheated sometimes. I would find my pebbles, I would put them in a safe place. The next time when I would search for them and I couldn't find the 3rd or 4th one, I knew exactly where to go and pick them up. It was okay, it was my game. I made the rules and it worked for me. My mom is a great lady. Great lady. She would do anything and everything to get a little bit of extra food.
The children were very young and could do with less, but my husband was a tall man. He needed food, and I couldn't give it to him.
And one day, my mom was able to smuggle some potatoes and some salt from the kitchen where she worked.
I remember that we were sitting on my upper bed. The children were hungry, and I could bring some potatoes and something else home and water and try to cook it.
And using an empty can as a pot and pieces from the wooden slats from our bed, so-called bed, it's firewood, she somehow managed to cook soup. I was on the bed with her, trying to hide and shield what she was doing. The soup was simmering, and just about finished when the German guards entered our barrack for a surprise inspection. And in our rush to hide the setup, the boiling soup spilled on my leg. We had been taught self-discipline and self-control the hard way, for I knew for sure that if I had cried out, it would have cost us our lives. They would have detected where we were. They would have seen what we were doing. And we for sure would have lost our life. We lost the soup that night, but not our lives. Towards the end, it was early April of 1945. People were dying more so than ever, but not nearly fast enough to suit the Nazis. It was then decided to send 3 trainloads of our people towards Eastern Europe, towards the extermination camps and the gas chambers. And in their minds, that was a much faster way of eliminating our people.
The Blumenthals were put on a train and shipped out once again. 6 days later, the Allies liberated Bergen-Belsen, and the SS Guards gave it up without a fight. The British Army shot this documentary footage upon entering the camp. Dead bodies were everywhere, so numerous that mass graves were quickly created. The SS were forced to bury the dead. Typhus was rampant, and Allied Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower ordered the camp burned down to prevent infection from spreading to surrounding areas. Camp Commandant Josef Kramer, known as the Beast of Belsen, was later tried in a British military court and sentenced to death by hanging. Of the 3 trains leaving Bergen-Belsen in the final days, one ended up in Theresienstadt, which was liberated by the Soviet Army. Prisoners on the second train were freed by American soldiers not far from the camp. But the Blumenthals remained trapped on the third train in Nazi-held territory, and their fate was far from certain.
My family was among the 2,500 on the last of these 3 trains. And there we were, on this train, for 2 weeks, no food, no water, no sanitary facilities, no medical supplies. They did allow people to get out whenever the train came to a stop, to take up roots to eat or take a drink from a nearby stream. But of course that was only good for those who were able and who were strong enough. And my mother recalls taking some sort of a pot and collecting water from the locomotive so we should have something to drink. Who knows what else that pot was used for. At that same time, while the train was at a standstill, the newly dead were taken off and they were buried along the tracks. It was a hell on wheels. It was a horror. We were in that train car like sardines. I, with a burned leg, couldn't keep the wound clean or lice-free, was full of pus. It was down to the bone, no medical supplies, nothing to ease the pain or to make it heal. Typhus is a highly contagious disease. It was deadly, and it's caused from lice and filth. In addition, our train was subject to air attacks from the Allies. Amazing that anyone was able to survive under such conditions. And out of the 2,500 of us, 500 died en route. That's 1 out of every 5. After 2 weeks on this horrendous journey, it was surreal. The Germans stormed through the train and demanded what was left of our civilian clothing so that they would not be recognized by the Allies. And that's when we knew that the war was coming to an end. And It was the Russian army that liberated our train. And they led us to a farm village in eastern Germany. This farm village was called Tröbitz. It was just a bit south of Berlin, near Dresden, in eastern Germany. And many of the inhabitants there had fled. And not all of them, some of them actually helped us. And of course they contracted typhus also, and many of them died. We took over the homes of those farmers who fled, and there was ample food in their kitchens. It was good, it was rich, and actually too good for our starved bodies. We could not tolerate that unfamiliar nourishment. People died from overeating. And at that time, at the age of 10 and a half, I weighed 35 pounds. We owe them our lives, there's no doubt about it. And I was brought to a nearby clinic for medical attention for my leg and was in very bad condition. And that clinic was a horrendous sight. Amputees were treated everywhere. I remember that they put a powder on my leg. It had to be a type of penicillin or sulfur powder. It was a yellow powder. And I was so lucky that they treated my leg as opposed to just amputating, because that's what they were quick to do. And I went back. They had me come back every day. And I would see the wound getting smaller and healing little by little. And I guess I have a wonderful way of healing mentally as well as physically.
We felt very relieved, but the worry about my husband, that was the worst thing. I didn't know. And then I was too weak to go to the hospital where the Russians put him. And I will never forget, Dr. Friend came to me once in the morning.
In Tröbitz, my father was eventually brought to a clinic or a hospital, makeshift hospital that they had there. And my mom remembers somehow my father was able to keep his tefillin. Those are certain leather strips that are used for prayer in the morning. And he would use them in secret whenever possible. He would say his prayers whenever possible. Daven. And he also had a talit, it's a prayer shawl. Somehow he was able to keep that. And someone came to my mother in Tröbitz, where we were liberated, and asked for the prayer shawl, my father's prayer shawl. My mother said, "Why would you need my husband's prayer shawl? He's ill in the hospital." And that's when she was told that he had died, and that they used the prayer shawl to wrap him in. And that's how he was buried. We were all ill with typhus, but my father had to die from it. And that was 6 weeks after our liberation. 6 weeks after. Mental torment and physical abuse. Of 6.5 years of this terror. He had to die. And my 12-year-old brother actually helped bury our father.
One of the two men handed me a shovel, and we placed the body into the ground and shoveled dirt on it, filled the grave. That's what I remember distinctly.
There were no feelings left anymore. We just survived from 1 hour to the other, not from one day to the other.
I know that for years we did not talk about it. Maybe 25, 30 years, it's really that long that we did not.
Yeah.
Yes. And what was it, or what is it that now brings you to open up a little bit?
I don't voluntarily talk about, still don't talk about it. I don't.
No. You need that.
Unless I'm prompted, and then many times I refuse to talk about it. I just, you know, should be buried.
Nothing more to say. It hurts to talk about it.
I'm sure.
That's all I have to say.
After we recuperated in this little town, a farm village of Treubitz, we were sent back to Holland. And there, eventually, my brother and I were in a children's home in preparation to live in then pre-state Israel. And many of the children there survived alone. They had no parents. And that's where we became reacquainted with life in its normal state in this children's home. An amateurish film was taken in 1946. It was March of 46, the holiday of Purim in particular.